At 30,000 feet, Keanu Reeves felt a strange vibration. Seconds later, his jet was plummeting toward a forgotten town he hadn't seen in decades. What he did after stepping off that burning plane wasn't about survival. It was about repaying a silent debt from his past. But who was watching him, and why did they want him gone? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sound was barely noticeable at first, a soft, almost imperceptible rattle through the frame of the aircraft. But for Captain Elena Brooks, every sound in the sky had meaning, and this one wasn't right. She glanced down at her instrument panel, scanning row after row of green lights. Everything looked perfect. Altitude steady, airspeed optimal, engine temperatures holding, no warnings. Nothing blinking red, yet something deep in her gut tensed. The plane shuddered again, this time with a low, grinding vibration, like metal shifting under stress. She glanced over her shoulder through the open cockpit door, where the sole passenger sat quietly, reading a folded sheet of paper. Keanu Reeves, calm as ever, didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did, she could never quite tell with him. In the passenger cabin, Keanu held the handwritten letter gently in both hands, like something sacred. The paper was crinkled, the ink slightly smudged. It had arrived through one of the many fan mail stacks he received weekly. But this one had been different. It wasn't a request for a selfie or an autograph. It was a letter from a girl named Lily. 10 years old, no return address, just a single request scribbled in pencil at the bottom. Please don't forget me. He'd read it a dozen times already, but something about being in the air made him reach for it again. The words were uneven, misspelled in places, but deeply human. She wrote about watching his movies from the hospital bed, about how her grandfather used to tell stories about kindness, and how one of them reminded her of Keanu. She said he looked like someone who kept promises, and that maybe, if he ever came to her town, he might stop by and say hello. He had never responded. Not because he didn't want to, but because the letter had arrived anonymously, no way to trace it. No last name, no town, just Lily. That had stayed with him. The jet gave a sudden jolt, harder this time. The coffee in the cup beside him rippled violently. Keanu looked up. Elena's voice crackled softly through the intercom. Apologies for the bump, Mr. Reeves. Light turbulence. But her hands were already tightening on the yoke. She was trained to recognize patterns, and this one had crossed a line. She tapped into the diagnostic system, pulling up engine telemetry. Her fingers hovered over the screen as the data fed in. Again, nothing. But the vibration was increasing. Keanu placed the letter gently on the seat beside him and stood, moving toward the cockpit. "Elena?" he asked, his voice calm, steady. She turned and met his eyes through the open doorway. "It's probably nothing," she said, "but I'm going to start running a few emergency checks just in case." He gave a slow nod. No panic, no questions, just quiet trust. The same trust he'd shown her for the last 18 months she'd worked as his pilot. But even as he sat back down and fastened his seatbelt, Elena's mind was already working the possibilities. Metal fatigue, engine stall, turbine imbalance. Whatever it wasn't waiting for permission to get worse. The left engine gave a shriek so loud it pierced the cabin like a blade. Then, the lights on Elena's panel shifted from green to red in one horrible, synchronized blink. Warnings flashed. Oil pressure was plummeting. Engine temperature spiked. A low beeping began, steady, insistent, urgent. "Elena to control," she said into the radio, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Falcon 7 requesting emergency landing clearance. We have a developing situation. Left engine compromised." "Copy, Falcon 7, came the reply. "State your position and passenger count." Elena rattled off their coordinates and added, "1 passenger, High preferable, Keanu Reeves. There was a pause. Nearest viable airfield is Eden's Hollow Regional, 27 miles southeast. It's a short strip, but it'll hold you. Winds are calm, runway clear. Do you copy? Copy. Diverting now. She banked the jet sharply to the southeast. The landscape below tilted, the horizon sliding across the windshield. Keanu felt the turn, but he didn't speak. His hands rested quietly on the arms of the chair, his seatbelt tight across his chest. Outside the window, the world looked serene, clouds drifting below like a white sea. But inside, tension pulsed like a heartbeat. Elena flipped on the intercom again. "Mr. Reeves, we've had an engine failure. I need to make an emergency landing. Buckle in tight." "All right," Keanu replied. Nothing else. No panic, just quiet acceptance. But inside, something inside him stirred at the name. Eden's Hollow. He hadn't heard that name in over 30 years. It was more than a town. It was a memory, a scar, a piece of him he'd buried deep. But now, through some cosmic twist, he was headed straight into it. He leaned forward, looking out the window again. The clouds began to thin, revealing a patchwork of trees, fields, and winding roads. A town nestled quietly at the edge of a frozen lake. From above, it looked peaceful. But Keanu knew better. That town had secrets, and one of them involved him. Back in the cockpit, Elena adjusted flaps and recalculated descent speed. The vibration had lessened, but the warning lights were still red. The left engine was failing fast. Smoke had begun to curl faintly from the turbine housing. They were losing altitude, but still had enough glide to reach Eden's Hollow if everything else held together. "Hang on," she whispered. "Just get us down." The plane dipped lower. Keanu's heart pounded, not from fear, but from recognition. He hadn't spoken about that town in decades. Not to anyone. But someone there had written him a letter. Someone still remembered. And now, fate, or something that felt like it, was sending him back. Elena radioed final approach. "Falcon 7 inbound. Requesting runway clearance at Eden's Hollow." "You're cleared to land," came the response. "Fire and rescue are en route." Keanu looked out the window. The outline of the old runway came into view. Faded white markings, cracked asphalt, snow pushed aside in uneven ridges. It was barely visible through the low winter mist. But it was there, waiting. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. In his mind, a flicker of memory surfaced, a teenage version of himself, shivering on the steps of a community center, a voice yelling, a man with rough hands pushing him away, and then another voice, gentle, steady, someone who didn't ask questions, just handed him a sandwich and sat with him on the curb in silence. A janitor, a man named Sammy Langston. He opened his eyes, the memory vanished, but the feeling stayed. That moment had saved him in a way no movie ever could. He never went back, never looked for the man again. But he never forgot. Now the plane was gliding lower. Elena's hands were firm on the controls. The cabin trembled as they descended. The smoke from the left engine grew thicker. Warning sirens screamed. The ground rushed up to meet them. Keanu braced as the wheels hit the tarmac with a bone-jarring crunch. The plane bounced, then slammed back down. Sparks flew from the left side. Elena fought to keep the nose straight, the rudder twitching under her feet. The plane skidded for what felt like forever. Finally, it slowed, screeched, then stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then came the chaos, sirens blaring, emergency crews racing toward the plane. Through the smoke, Keanu could see shapes moving in neon yellow vests. The cabin door opened. Cold winter air flooded in. Elena turned to him, breathing hard but composed. "You all right?" "I'm fine," Keanu said, standing slowly. "You did great." But his eyes weren't on the emergency workers. They were on the crowd, forming just outside the airport fence. Locals. Curious faces. Among them he saw an old man in a wheelchair, wearing a knit cap. The man stared at the plane, unmoving. Then, slowly, he raised one hand in a quiet wave. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. "Sammy?" He stepped to the edge of the open door and looked out across the icy tarmac. It couldn't be. 30 years had passed, but something in that man's eyes hadn't changed. The same patience, the same strength. Captain Elena touched his arm. "Do you want to wait for the paramedics?" Keanu shook his head. "No, I need to talk to someone." As the cold wind swept around him, he descended the steps of the jet and walked toward the man who once saved his life, back to the town that nearly broke him. The smoke was now curling in thick gray strands from the left wing, trailing behind the aircraft like a dark ribbon as the jet descended. Captain Elena Brooks held the controls tight, her jaw set, eyes scanning every inch of the rapidly approaching runway. There was no room for error. Eden's Hollow Regional was little more than an old military strip turned civil use. It hadn't seen a private jet in years, let alone one attempting an emergency landing with a compromised engine. Inside the cabin, Keanu Reeves sat perfectly still, not frozen by fear, but grounded by thought. Outside the window, the familiar outline of Eden's Hollow grew closer. It was both distant and intimate, like a face from a dream he couldn't forget. Fields of frost-dusted grass spread toward the tree line. The water tower still stood near the edge of town, its paint faded, but the name barely visible. And there, tucked behind the industrial buildings, was the stretch of street where it all happened. The alley behind the high school, the back of the diner, the bench he once slept on for 3 nights. He forced his focus back to the present as the plane pitched downward sharply. The runway came into view, short, uneven, marked with lines that looked weathered and half erased. Fire trucks waited at the far end, already positioned with hoses ready. Emergency lights strobed in rhythmic flashes. Elena's voice, calm but firm, echoed through the intercom. "Race for landing." Keanu leaned forward, folded the letter from Lily once more, and slid it carefully into the inside pocket of his coat. His fingers lingered over it a moment, pressing it close to his chest. He looked out the window again as the nose dipped. His breath fogged the glass. The town he thought he'd left behind was calling him home in the most unexpected way. With the flaps fully extended and the right engine whining under pressure, Elena committed to the landing. The tires touched down with a bone-rattling slam. The aircraft bounced once, hard, then again, scraping violently against the ground. Sparks flew from the underside, metal screamed. Keanu's seatbelt dug into his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. Elena fought to keep the aircraft steady. The left engine, now a full loss, caused drag. The plane tilted slightly before she compensated, using rudder and braking force to pull them straight. The entire aircraft shuddered as it slowed. Every inch they traveled felt like a mile. Then, finally, it stopped. Complete silence filled the cabin for a moment. No alarms, no vibration, just the sound of cooling metal and Keanu's steady breath. Keanu unclipped his belt and sat motionless for a second, letting the weight of the moment settle around him. He glanced back out the window. The runway was slick with frost. The fire trucks were closing in, and personnel in bright vests were already motioning toward the aircraft's fuselage. But Keanu's eyes weren't on them. They were on the man in the wheelchair beyond the fence. The crowd that had gathered was mostly curious locals and airport staff. But one figure stood out. Older, bundled in layers, a knit cap pulled low over his forehead, his gloved hands resting on the wheels of his chair. He wasn't moving. He wasn't talking. He was just watching. Something about the posture, the stillness, the familiarity of it. Keanu knew. He rose, steadying himself as the adrenaline slowly wore off. Captain Elena appeared from the cockpit, her expression a mix of nerves and relief. "You okay?" she asked. Keanu nodded slowly. You brought us down. That was heroic. I've never landed on a strip this short before, she said, then paused. You ever heard of this place? Eden's Hollow? He met her gaze for a beat too long before replying. A long time ago. Emergency crews opened the cabin door. Cold winter air rushed in, bracing and sharp. Firefighters ran checks. Elena climbed down to speak with the medics and assess the damage. Keanu stood just behind the open threshold, not ready to step off yet. The crowd was larger now. He kept looking at the man in the wheelchair. He descended the steps. Every part of him expected this moment to feel strange. But it didn't. It felt like something inevitable. As if no matter where he'd traveled, no matter how many movies he'd made, some part of his soul had always known he'd return here. Just not like this. On the ground, his boots crunched against the thin layer of frost that coated the concrete. Paramedics rushed over, but he waved them off gently. His eyes remained fixed on the fence. The man hadn't moved. Then, slowly, the man raised his hand. Keanu took a step forward. I think I know him, he murmured to Elena, who had followed him halfway down the tarmac. Someone from here? Keanu didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pressed his palm flat against the letter in his pocket, the one from Lily. He had thought it was chance, coincidence, a random letter among hundreds. But now, standing in the icy wind of a forgotten town, looking into the eyes of a man he hadn't seen since he was 17, Keanu started to believe it was something else entirely. Back then, the man had gone by Mr. Langston. He was the night janitor at the high school, though no one ever called him by name. He was just the guy with the mop, the one who showed up after everyone left. But Keanu remembered more than that. He remembered the quiet way the man used to nod when they passed in the halls, the way he once gave him an old space heater when he found Keanu sleeping in the empty locker room during the winter break. And more than anything, he remembered the day that changed everything. A group of seniors had cornered Keanu behind the gym. He was 15. They were angry. He didn't belong here, they said. He was just some washed-up transfer kid with no home and no real name. He tried to walk away, but they shoved him against the wall, kicked him while he was down. It didn't last long, though, because then Mr. Langston appeared. He didn't yell, didn't threaten. He just stepped between them and stared them down. A quiet mountain of a man who wouldn't budge. The boys left without another word. Keanu had looked up at him, bleeding, humiliated, and scared. Mr. Langston didn't say much, just helped him to his feet, handed him a cloth, and walked him to the nurse's office. That was the last time they spoke. Until now, Keanu's feet carried him closer to the fence, where a few locals stood in awe, phones raised, whispers spreading that Keanu Reeves had just stepped off a smoking jet into their sleepy town. But Keanu wasn't paying attention to them. He reached the fence, stopped a few feet away, and waited. The man in the wheelchair squinted. His voice was hoarse when it came, but steady. Didn't think I'd ever see you here again. Keanu's breath caught for a second. Then he smiled, eyes soft. It's been a long time, Mr. Langston. You remember me. You saved my life. There was a long pause. The man gave a slow nod. And you, son, disappeared like you never existed. I wasn't ready, Keanu said. I ran. I didn't even look back. Most people don't. Not from this place. Keanu glanced around, taking in the crowd, the cracked buildings in the distance, the silent pull of the place. I didn't mean to come back, but now you're here. Yeah, Keanu said, placing a hand on the cold metal fence. Now I'm here. He looked past the man toward the heart of the town he once called a secret. The cold wind tugged at his coat. In his pocket, the letter from Lily sat close to his heart. He didn't know it yet, but she would be the reason he stayed. The chaos around the jet intensified. Firefighters moved in tight formations around the wings, hosing down the smoldering engine. Technicians shouted instructions, and paramedics prepared stretchers just in case. Camera flashes from nearby phones lit up the scene as word of Keanu Reeves' emergency landing traveled fast. But for Keanu, everything beyond the fence had gone silent. The roar of diesel engines, the buzz of rescue radios, the hiss of fire hoses, it all faded beneath the weight of one simple moment. Sammy Langston. Time had weathered the man's face, but not his spirit. His shoulders were thinner and his hands shook slightly as they rested on the wheels of his chair. His eyes, though, were the same, dark and steady. When Keanu had last seen them, he was just a scared teen on the brink of giving up. Now, decades later, he stood across from the man who gave him the strength to survive a world that tried to break him. Keanu stepped closer to the fence, but before he could speak, a uniformed responder approached. "Sir, you need to clear this area. There's still active risk." Keanu gently raised his hand. "Give me just 1 minute." The man paused, recognizing the gravity of the request, not just because of who Keanu was, but because of how he said it. The responder gave a brief nod, then turned away. Elena, meanwhile, was being pulled toward the rescue truck for a debrief. She looked back once, confused by the direction Keanu was walking. He wasn't headed to the emergency vehicle or to safety. He was drifting toward the edge of the chaos, away from the spotlight, following something more important than protocol: memory. The crowd behind the fence had grown. Some murmured in excitement, others just watched. A teenage boy in a hoodie looked up from his phone and whispered, "Is that really him?" But Keanu wasn't looking at any of them. His attention stayed locked on the old man in the wheelchair. Sammy's lips moved first. "You grew taller," he said with a dry chuckle. "Or maybe I just shrank." Keanu blinked, emotion flooding him without warning. He forced a small smile. "You still look like the guy who threw himself between me and 3 seniors in that alley. He wasn't going to let them gut you. You had more heart than all of them put together. I never got to say thank you. I didn't need you to, but I needed to." Keanu replied quietly. The wind bit at their faces, sharp and real. A long pause stretched between them as the past opened up like a scar that never quite healed. Keanu stepped closer until they were only a few feet apart, the fence still dividing them. For a moment, neither man said anything. Keanu's breath caught as he took in the details. Sammy's worn coat, the knitted gloves with frayed cuffs, the way his knees were covered with a faded wool blanket. The wheelchair's wheels looked old, the rubber cracked along the edges. The man who once shielded him from violence now looked like someone the world had forgotten. "Hey, were you still here?" Keanu asked softly. Sammy gave a faint smile. "You mean Eden's Hollow? I never left. This town's got its grip on people like me. You could have gone anywhere." And done what? Mopping floors was the one place no one asked questions. That suited me fine. Keanu looked down, the guilt rising. "I should have come back. I thought about it so many times, but I didn't. I told myself you wouldn't remember me." "Keanu," Sammy said, his voice more direct now, "you think I forgot the boy with holes in his shoes and fire in his eyes? I knew you had something in you. Everyone else saw a dropout. I saw a survivor." Keanu's eyes stung, but he didn't blink. "After that day, behind the gym, I kept thinking you'd disappear," Sammy continued. "Then one night, you were just gone. No goodbye. I figured maybe that meant you finally found a way out." "I ran," Keanu admitted. "I was scared, angry. I thought if I just left, I could erase everything. But it never really went away." Sammy gave a knowing nod. "The town never does. You carry it." Keanu lowered his voice. "There was this girl, Lily. She sent me a letter. No last name. Just a note about this place. I didn't know what to make of it. But now, standing here, I feel like it wasn't random, like someone wanted me back here." Sammy's brow furrowed. "Lily, huh? There's a Lily here, all right. She's been through things most people can't imagine. but she still believes in good. Sounds like someone she'd write to. You know her? Sammy hesitated. Yeah, she's my granddaughter. Keanu froze. The breath left his lungs. Sammy nodded slowly. Her mom? She's gone. Lily's been staying with me since she was 4. Writes letters to people she admires. She said one day she was going to find a way to meet you. I told her not to get her hopes up. Keanu felt the letter in his coat pocket like a heartbeat. That child had reached into the darkness of his past and unknowingly pulled him back to the man who saved him. Keanu didn't speak at first. He just stood there, stunned. The letter that had haunted him for months, the one that arrived with no return address, had led him not only to a forgotten town, but straight into the arms of unfinished gratitude. I kept that letter, Keanu said. I've read it more times than I can count. Sammy's eyes brightened. She'll be glad to hear that. You gave her hope, that someone like you could care enough to read her words. She reminded me of who I used to be, of who I still am. Sammy chuckled again, though his voice cracked. Then I guess she's done her job. Keanu placed his hand on the fence again. Can I see her? She's at school, Sammy replied. But I can take you there, if you're staying a while. I wasn't planning to, but no. Keanu looked around. The town hadn't changed much. The diner sign still flickered. The roads were patched with gravel. The cold wind still whispered secrets between buildings. But maybe, just maybe, it had been waiting for him to come home and finish what he never started. I'll stay, Keanu said, at least for a few days. Sammy nodded. She'll want to see you, but you should know she's sick. It's not something she talks about. She hides it well, but it's there. Keanu's eyes tightened. How bad? Some days better than others, Sammy replied, but she's stronger than she looks. I'd like to meet her anyway. You already have. She gave you something to come back for. As emergency crews began to pack up and officials started to clear the runway, Keanu stepped back from the fence. He motioned to one of the officers nearby and asked if they could open the gate. Moments later, he was walking side by side with Sammy Langston for the first time in over 30 years. No cameras, no reporters, just 2 lives reconnected by fate, pain, and the quiet resilience of a little girl who believed in second chances. As they moved slowly toward Sammy's truck, which had been adapted with hand controls, Keanu kept a hand in his coat, resting on Lily's letter. Behind them, the jet still smoked on the runway. The town still watched from a distance. But for Keanu, the real emergency wasn't over when the wheels hit the ground. It was just beginning. Because now he had a chance to repay a debt, mend an old wound, and face the ghosts of a past he could no longer ignore. As the emergency response crews began packing their equipment, the energy around Eden's Hollow Regional Airport slowly shifted. The adrenaline wore off. The urgency calmed. Most of the crowd had dispersed, but a few lingered behind the fences, murmuring and pointing. Keanu ignored them all. His focus remained on Sammy, who now sat by the faded wooden bench just outside the chain-link perimeter. Keanu followed slowly as Sammy rolled himself forward, past the fire trucks and toward the parking lot lined with cracked pavement and frost-dusted patches of grass. The late afternoon sun filtered through a gray sky, casting long shadows across the asphalt. A gust of wind rustled the bare trees behind them. It felt like the entire town was holding its breath. Sammy stopped beside the bench, wincing slightly as he adjusted the blanket on his lap. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a pair of tinted glasses and placing them on carefully. His head turned slightly in Keanu's direction, but his gaze remained vague. Cloudy. Distant. You know, Sammy said quietly, I didn't even know who was on that jet. I just came to see what all the noise was about. Keanu sat down slowly beside him, the bench creaking under his weight. You still come out to the airport? Sometimes, Sammy said. On days when my knees don't scream too loud. The air's better out here, and I like to watch the birds take off. Keanu nodded. A moment passed. The wind carried a thin whistle through the trees, and a small group of firefighters laughed softly in the distance. Sammy adjusted his glasses. That voice, I've heard it before. Keanu turned to him. Do you remember a kid who used to hide behind the auditorium when the bullies came? Sammy's hands stilled on the edge of his blanket. His face turned, and though he couldn't quite meet Keanu's eyes, the faintest smile tugged at the corner of his lips. I never forget the ones I bled for. Keanu's throat tightened. You carried me to the nurse's office, he said, voice hushed. Sat there until I stopped shaking. Then you walked away like it was nothing. Wasn't nothing to me, Sammy replied. Just didn't think a kid like you would want people to see a janitor hovering over him. Pride's a tricky thing. I didn't care about pride, Keanu said. I cared about survival, and you gave me that. Sammy leaned back, exhaling deeply. You were the one who survived. I just did what I could. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Keanu watched the last of the smoke from the damaged engine curl upward into the gray sky. His heart thudded with a weight he hadn't felt in years. A commotion stirred near the edge of the tarmac. A local reporter, holding a microphone and followed by a cameraman, was weaving through the small group of remaining onlookers. She looked young, eager, and out of place in the gravity of this moment. That's Keanu Reeves, she whispered loudly to her camera operator. We have to get a statement. Keanu turned his head slightly as they approached, sensing the intrusion before it fully arrived. The woman stepped forward, her microphone already raised. Mr. Reeves, would you mind telling us what happened on the plane? Are you hurt? Were you on board when the mayday? Keanu raised his hand firmly, not angry, but unshakably clear. This isn't the time. The reporter hesitated. Just one comment. He gestured toward Sammy. This man saved my life. I'm not leaving until I return the favor. That was all he said. The cameraman, sensing the shift, backed up. The reporter, cheeks flushed, gave a quick nod and stepped away. No further questions were asked. Keanu turned back to Sammy, who hadn't said a word during the interruption. He was smiling faintly now. You always had that calm about you, Sammy murmured. Even back then. Keanu shook his head gently. I was scared of everything. I just learned how to look still. Sammy turned slightly, his cloudy eyes reflecting the dull light of the winter sun. You looked out for the kids who got picked on after you. I remember that. I was trying to be you. Sammy snorted. You became something bigger. No, Keanu replied. Just different. But what I never became was grateful. Not loud enough, not soon enough. Sammy reached out and placed a shaky hand on Keanu's forearm. You came back? That's more than most. Keanu looked down at the hand. The veins stood out, the skin thinned by age, the knuckles swollen from decades of work. He placed his own hand over Sammy's and held it there. You knew they'd jump me that day, didn't you? I saw them waiting, figured it'd go bad. And you walked into it anyway. Like I said, Sammy smiled, I never forget the ones I bled for. They sat like that for a long time. Two lives from opposite ends of the road, tied together by one silent act of courage. Keanu leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. He could almost hear the clang of the old high school bell, the shuffle of sneakers on cracked tile floors, the whisper of wind through broken windows. Do you remember the back hallway near the gym? Keanu asked. Only hallway I ever mopped more than once in a night, Sammy replied. Kids used to sneak in there to smoke. You always sat near the boiler. Keanu nodded. It was the only warm place I knew. You were always cold, wore the same jacket for 2 winters. I still have it, Keanu said quietly. It's in my closet back in LA. I could never throw it away. That's how you hold on to things, Sammy said, even if they hurt. Keanu paused, then reached into his coat and pulled out the folded letter. He passed it to Sammy, placing it gently into his hands. "Your granddaughter wrote this." Sammy's fingers traced the edges, slow and uncertain. "Sina saved me," Keanu continued, "just like you did." Sammy nodded but didn't speak. His lips pressed together tightly. "I'm not just here because the plane went down," Keanu added. "I'm here because something told me it was time. Time to stop running from this place. Time to say what I should have said all those years ago." He stood and turned to face him fully. "You gave me something no one else ever did. Not fame, not money, not applause. You gave me safety." Sammy's throat worked to form words, but none came at first. His eyes glistened behind the tinted glasses. "You were just a kid," he finally said. "But even then, I knew you'd come back someday." "Then you knew more than I did," Keanu smiled. From behind them, a gentle voice called out, "Grandpa?" Both men turned. A girl no older than 12 stood near the end of the path, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her cheeks red from the cold. Her eyes were wide with wonder. She clutched something in her hand. A drawing. It looked like a portrait. A familiar face. Sammy lifted his hand. "Come here, sweetheart." She walked forward slowly, then stopped when she recognized the man beside her grandfather. Her mouth parted slightly. "You?" Keanu smiled and crouched to meet her gaze. "You must be Lily." She nodded slowly. "I wrote you a letter." "I know," he said, "and it brought me home." The bell above the door jingled softly as Keanu stepped into the diner. The scent of old coffee, grilled onions, and worn leather booths wrapped around him like a memory. Sammy followed slowly behind, Lily beside him, her small hand resting gently on the edge of his wheelchair. The place hadn't changed in decades. Same checkered floor, same flickering neon sign over the counter that read, "Marla's Cafe." A waitress glanced up from behind the register and did a double take, her eyes going wide. Keanu gave a polite nod but didn't stop. They took a booth near the back, away from the window. He let Sammy settle in, then helped Lily remove her coat. She sat beside her grandfather, still staring at Keanu like he might vanish if she blinked. The waitress approached, cautiously. "Can I get you all something?" "3 hot chocolates," Sammy said with a tired smile. "Extra marshmallows for the little one." Lily beamed and nodded. Keanu leaned back, taking in the moment. For a second, it felt normal, familiar. But under the surface, something heavier stirred. Sammy folded his hands on the table. "You didn't come here for an interview or publicity." Keanu shook his head. "You came because of that letter." "I didn't know who wrote it at first," Keanu admitted. "It came through a foundation I donate to, a pile of letters, hundreds of them. Most get answered by volunteers, but this one, it didn't feel like a fan letter. It felt like a lifeline." He reached into his coat and pulled out the same worn envelope. He placed it gently on the table. Sammy stared at it in silence. "He never meant for it to reach you," Sammy said finally. "She just wanted to write to someone who seemed good." "Well, it did reach me, and I couldn't stop thinking about it." Lily shifted in her seat. "I wrote it after I saw you in that movie with the dog." Keanu smiled. "John Wick?" She nodded shyly. "You looked like someone who wouldn't let people get hurt, and I wanted someone like that in our lives." Sammy rested his hand on hers, his voice soft. "She doesn't know what it's like to ask for help. I raised her to stand tall, but standing tall hasn't paid for her treatments." The waitress returned with 3 mugs of hot chocolate, steam rising from the surface. She placed them down carefully, noticing the tension in the air but saying nothing. She left with a glance over her shoulder, sensing this wasn't a moment to interrupt. Keanu stirred his drink slowly, eyes still on Sammy. "She mentioned in the letter that things were hard, but she never said why." Sammy sighed. "She has a rare genetic condition. It affects her blood. Expensive treatments, limited specialists. We had a few good years, but when her mother died, things got worse. I sold the house, took out what I could. It still wasn't enough. Keanu listened without flinching. Why didn't you reach out? Sammy gave a small laugh. To who? You think the people in this town are going to line up to help the old janitor? I used to clean their messes. That's all they remember. And me? Keanu asked. You were long gone. I never expected to see you again. But Lily found a way. He always does, Sammy whispered. Keanu looked at Lily. Why did you send the letter to that children's foundation? She shrugged. They had a list of people you could write to. I picked your name. I didn't think it'd work, but it did. Sammy reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, a medical invoice. Last month's bill, I didn't have enough to cover it. We're waiting to hear if the clinic will even continue the sessions. Keanu took the paper silently and read it. The numbers were high. Too high for someone living on a fixed income. She needs monthly transfusions, Sammy explained. Plus experimental meds. We're on a trial list, but it doesn't cover everything. There's a travel cost, nutrition planning, secondary care. It's more than I can manage. Keanu folded the paper again and set it beside the letter. You shouldn't be doing this alone. I wasn't going to ask for anything. I know, Keanu said. But I came here for a reason. That letter? I didn't just read it. I felt it. Like someone was reaching through time. Sammy was quiet. The sounds of the diner faded again. You saved my life, Sammy. That day behind the school. You gave me a chance I didn't think I deserved. Now I have a chance to return it. And I'm not walking away from that. Lily's eyes widened. Does that mean... It means I'm going to help however I can, Keanu said gently. Not just with bills, with everything. Sammy looked down at the table. His fingers trembled around the mug. I never wanted charity. This isn't charity, Keanu replied. This is gratitude. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a small, folded document. It was already signed. Sammy took it slowly, unfolding it with shaking hands. What's this? An appointment, Keanu said. At one of the top children's hospitals in the state. Specialists in her condition. I called them the moment we landed. Sammy's breath hitched. But the cost? Handled. Lily looked between them. Is it far away? A couple of hours, Keanu said. But I'll arrange transportation. You won't be alone. Sammy couldn't find the words. His mouth opened, but nothing came. Keanu continued, I'm not trying to erase the past. I just want to make sure the future doesn't hurt as much. Finally, Sammy whispered, Why now? Because I was lost too, Keanu said. And that letter reminded me of where I came from, who helped me, and what kind of man I still want to be. Lily leaned into her grandfather's side and hugged him. Her voice was small, but steady. We're going to be okay now. Keanu smiled, but behind it was something deeper. A promise made not in words, but in action. A promise to repay the one man who believed in him when no one else did. And to protect the girl who reached across the silence and unknowingly saved him again. The waitress came back with the check, but Keanu waved it off. He had already paid. As they stood to leave, Keanu placed the letter back in his coat pocket. This time, it wasn't a question mark. It was a vow. He held the door open for Sammy and Lily, stepping out into the cold. Snow had started to fall, dusting the pavement with delicate flakes. A quiet reunion had become something more, a turning point, for Sammy, for Lily, and for Keanu himself. Because sometimes, the past doesn't call to haunt you. Sometimes, it calls to be healed. The hospital hallway was quiet, just the hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional beep from a monitor behind a closed door. Keanu walked slowly, his footsteps muted by the pale linoleum floor. A nurse at the station pointed him toward Lily's room, smiling gently as if she already knew why he was there, but before he entered, Keanu stopped. Through the narrow window of the hospital room door, he could see her. Lily was sitting up in bed, legs tucked beneath her blanket, a small tray of crayons and paper in front of her. She was hunched over her drawing, focused, tongue peeking out slightly between her lips in concentration. Her hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and her IV line ran silently from the back of her hand to the machine beside her. Keanu leaned in closer. On the page, Lily had sketched a scene from memory, or maybe imagination. It showed a tall man with kind eyes giving his jacket to a homeless woman outside a store, shielding her from the rain. The crayon strokes were careful, full of color and hope. At the top, in shaky handwriting, she'd written, "Real heroes don't wear capes." The nurse beside him whispered, "She draws every day, mostly pictures of you. Says you're the kind of person who shows up when no one else does." Keanu's throat tightened. He nodded silently. The nurse gently tapped the door and opened it for him. Lily looked up, confused at first. Her eyes scanned the room, then widened. She blinked once, twice. Then her mouth dropped open. "Are you? Really you?" Keanu stepped inside, smiling softly. "I think so." Lily's eyes filled with tears. She gasped and pressed a hand over her mouth. "You're here! You're actually here!" Keanu moved to the side of her bed. "I heard someone was drawing superheroes. I had to meet her." Lily flung her arms around him without hesitation, burying her face in his chest. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. Keanu held her gently, letting her take the moment in fully. When she finally leaned back, her smile was wide and unfiltered. "I didn't think you'd come," she whispered. "Your letter traveled a long way," Keanu said, "but it found me." She looked down at her drawing, then handed it to him. "It's you, from that video, when you gave your jacket to that woman." Keanu examined the drawing. "You made me look taller." Lily giggled. "That's because you're a giant to me." They talked for hours. Lily asked about his movies, his motorcycles, and his favorite food. "Mac and cheese," he admitted with a grin. She told him about her school, about missing her mom, and about how her grandpa always let her fall asleep watching old black and white movies. Keanu listened without interrupting. He let her take up the space, and when her energy began to fade, he gently tucked her blanket up to her chin. The nurse came in and dimmed the lights. "She tires quickly in the evenings. The transfusion makes her drowsy." Lily yawned and turned to Keanu one last time. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" "I'll be here as long as you want me to be." "Promise?" "I promise." She smiled, eyes fluttering shut, and within moments, she was asleep. Keanu stayed beside her, the quiet hum of machines surrounding him. After a while, he heard the soft creak of the door and turned to see Sammy entering, wheeling himself slowly into the room. He stopped near the window and stared at Lily, a mixture of pride and heartbreak in his eyes. "She hasn't smiled like that in months," Sammy whispered. "She's stronger than I ever was at her age," Keanu replied. "She's holding this together better than anyone." Sammy nodded slowly. "She's holding on because she thinks there's still something left to hold on to." Keanu looked over, sensing the shift in Sammy's voice. It was lower now, more burdened. "I need to tell you something," Sammy said. "Something I haven't told anyone outside this town." Keanu leaned forward. "Go ahead. You asked earlier why the treatments were so expensive? Why, even with the programs and clinics, it still wasn't enough?" Keanu nodded. Sammy exhaled. "It's the pharmacy. The only one in Eden's Hollow. Used to be family-run, decent folks, but it was bought out last year by a company called Central Crescent Holdings. Sounded legit. Promised to upgrade the store, provide access to rare medications. What they really did was corner the market." Keanu narrowed his eyes. "Demand controls the entire supply chain here now. No one in this town can get meds without going through them, and they set the prices sky high. No oversight, no accountability. You need insulin? Triple what it costs in the next county. Chemo meds? 10 times the usual rate." Keanu's jaw tightened. "That's criminal." "They're protected," Sammy said. "Turns out the guy who runs the regional branch is the mayor's cousin. They operate quietly. No paper trails, Most people can't even prove they're being gouged. Keanu sat back, absorbing every word. And Lily's meds? Same deal, Sammy said bitterly. They stopped offering them through the clinic. Claimed the manufacturer changed protocols. Now we have to buy through Central Crescent. Full price, upfront, no discounts. Why haven't people spoken up? Because most of them can't afford to be heard, Sammy said. You speak up, your delivery gets delayed, or worse, canceled. They always have a reason. Something about inventory issues or system errors. It's subtle, but intentional. Keanu shook his head slowly. And the town just takes it? They're scared, or tired, or both. Silence settled again between them. The hum of the machines continued, steady as a heartbeat. Keanu stood and walked to the window, staring out at the night sky beyond the parking lot. Snowflakes floated gently to the ground, soft as ash. I thought I came here because of a letter, he said. You did, Sammy replied. But maybe the letter was just the beginning. Sammy wheeled closer. You planning on starting a war with a pharmacy? I'm planning on finishing what they started, Keanu said quietly. No one should be able to profit off a child's pain. Not while I'm standing. He turned back to Lily's sleeping form, her small face peaceful under the dim lights. Let me guess, Sammy added. You're going to do it quietly. No headlines, no press releases. Keanu nodded. Just results. Sammy looked at him, and for the first time that day, his expression held something new. Relief. Maybe even hope. You always were a strange kid, he said with a soft chuckle. I had good teachers. Keanu knelt beside the bed and tucked Lily's drawing back into her sketchbook. Then he stood and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I'll be back first thing tomorrow, he whispered. But tonight, I have a few calls to make. As he moved toward the door, Sammy asked, You sure you're ready for this? Keanu looked over his shoulder. I've been ready since the day I saw her letter. He stepped into the hallway, pulling out his phone, his expression unreadable but resolved. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Eden's Hollow in silence. But under that silence, something had shifted. Something was coming. The morning air was sharp and quiet, a thin mist curling through the streets of Eden's Hollow as Keanu stepped out of his motel and walked the 2 blocks to the town's only pharmacy. The building sat at the edge of a crumbling strip mall, tucked between a shuttered bakery and an empty laundromat. Its signage was overly modern for such a tired town. Hollow RX, the kind of name designed by people who never lived there. The glass windows were tinted just enough to obscure the inside, and the parking lot was nearly empty. Keanu paused outside the door, heart steady, mind already focused. He wasn't just here to ask questions, he was here to confirm the truth. What Sammy had whispered the night before wasn't just a theory, it was a wound that ran deeper than anyone dared admit. Inside, the fluorescent lights cast a sterile, humming glow over rows of vitamins, over-the-counter drugs, and local tourist knickknacks no tourist would ever buy. A young woman behind the front counter greeted him with a stiff smile, clearly unaware of who he was, or perhaps pretending not to recognize him. Can I help you? She asked. I need to speak with a pharmacist, privately. About a prescription? No, about something else. The girl hesitated. She glanced at a security camera mounted in the corner, then turned and walked briskly toward a side door marked Staff Only. Keanu waited, observing everything. A security mirror gave him a wide-angled view of the back aisles. A small, elderly man with a limp was browsing allergy meds. A mother with a toddler picked up a pharmacy bag and left in a hurry. Tension was in the air, subtle but unmistakable. The door creaked open, and a short, heavy-set man emerged, dressed in a white lab coat that looked a size too small. His graying hair was combed flat, and his eyes were sharp and guarded. You wanted to talk? The man said without introducing himself. Keanu nodded. You're Gerald? That depends. Who's asking? Keanu kept his voice low. I think you already know. Gerald studied him a moment, then said, "Follow me." They passed through a narrow hallway behind the counter, where worn carpet met cold tile, and into a cramped storage office. Stacks of inventory boxes lined the walls. A humming fridge labeled biologic samples buzzed in the corner. Gerald closed the door and folded his arms. "All right, you've got 5 minutes." Keanu didn't waste time. He pulled out a folded sheet of paper from his coat pocket, an unofficial invoice he'd photographed from Sammy's kitchen table. It showed the cost of Lily's medication, just 6 months ago, versus now. "This drug tripled in price," Keanu said. Gerald squinted at the page but didn't take it. "Because it could. Because there's no one to stop them." "Who's them?" Gerald hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "You don't want to get involved in this. Not here. Not with these people." "I'm already involved," Keanu replied. "Now tell me what's going on." Gerald finally reached over and took the paper from Keanu's hand. His fingers trembled slightly, not from age, but from fear that had clearly settled in over time. He didn't sit down, just stood by the small desk and stared at the numbers like they were an indictment. "That drug," he said quietly, "used to cost $72 a vial. That was when we ordered direct, before the buyout." "Buyout?" Keanu asked. 2 years ago, Hollow RX was acquired by a firm based out of Delaware. They sent someone down here in a pressed suit, said they were consolidating independent pharmacies to improve efficiency, promised better distribution, lower prices, support. Gerald gave a hollow laugh. "Within 6 months, our vendors changed. We had new digital systems installed, but no access to override pricing. Everything was routed through their internal procurement platform." Keanu listened, his arms crossed, mind already working through what this meant. "And you couldn't push back?" Gerald looked at him. "I tried. Once. I flagged a pricing issue for a child's antibiotic, saw it jump from $12 to over $90. I called the help desk. The next day, 2 reps showed up from the company unannounced. They reviewed my logs and told me I'd been misusing admin privileges. I got a written warning, another one, and I lose my license." Keanu took a slow breath. "What's the name of the parent company?" Gerald hesitated again. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a business card. It was matte black with silver print. Doralon Partners, Healthcare Innovation Solutions. No phone number, just an email address and a P.O. box. "Doralon is just a shell," Gerald said. "From what I've learned, they have stakes in dozens of regional pharmacies like ours. Rural towns. Low scrutiny. They pump up prices on niche medications, especially pediatric and chemotherapy drugs, because those are harder to replace. And they know desperate families don't file complaints. They empty their savings." Keanu's jaw tightened. "And Lily?" Gerald looked away. "I saw her chart. Her medication was delayed because of an inventory lag. That's the term they use. It wasn't a mistake. Sammy got a call from someone the day after he tried to report it to the press. I heard about it through a nurse friend. The call said if he valued his granddaughter's life, he'd stop asking questions." A cold silence filled the room. Keanu stepped forward. "Do you have proof?" Gerald reached for another drawer but paused. "If I give you what I have, I need your word. No leaks traced back here. I've got a family." "You have my word," Keanu said firmly. Gerald nodded, then pulled out a flash drive in a small Ziploc. He handed it over without another word. The silence said everything. Keanu slipped it into his coat pocket. He had what he needed. Keanu left through the pharmacy's back exit, stepping into the narrow alley lined with rusted dumpsters and old delivery crates. A bitter gust of wind pushed against his coat, but it wasn't the cold that unsettled him. It was the weight of the flash drive in his pocket and the knowledge that Lily, and probably dozens of other children in towns like this, were caught in the crosshairs of greed. He didn't go back to the motel right away. Instead, he walked 2 blocks to a quiet coffee shop, ordered a cup of black coffee, and sat in a corner booth with his laptop. The place was empty except for a man reading a newspaper in the far corner and a waitress wiping down menus. Keanu waited until the Wi-Fi connected, then plugged in the drive. It opened to a folder labeled simply Internal. Inside were subfolders, invoices, emails, audio logs. The level of detail was stunning. Each file was meticulously cataloged. Gerald hadn't just been collecting information, he'd been building a case. Keanu clicked on one of the audio logs. A tinny recording played. 2 men discussing adjusted incentives and priority pressure zones. He paused it and opened a document in the invoices folder. It listed bulk purchase orders for rare pediatric medications, each with a markup margin in red. Eden's Hollow wasn't alone. There were towns from Nebraska, Alabama, New Mexico, all low-income areas, all medical deserts with only one pharmacy within 20 miles. One email stood out. It was from a Dorland executive to a logistics manager. The subject line, "Hold shipments if media alerted." The body read, "Any facility that reports pricing concerns or whistleblowing to the press must experience supply interruption immediately. No exceptions." Keanu's stomach churned. This wasn't negligence. It was a system built on silencing the vulnerable. His phone vibrated on the table. Unknown number. Just one line of text. "Stay out of Eden's Hollow affairs. You're not one of us anymore." Keanu didn't flinch. He locked the phone and looked out the window. A black SUV sat across the street, engine running, parked at an angle. Its driver didn't move. He took a sip of his coffee and shut his laptop. There were decisions to make, and none of them were easy. He could disappear from this town, make some quiet donation, and let lawyers handle the rest. That's what people expected celebrities to do. Distance themselves, stay clean. But he wasn't leaving Eden's Hollow. Not now. Not when the girl who believed in him might lose her fight. Not when the man who once shielded him was being crushed in silence. Not when every moment of comfort he'd built his life upon was being used to cover someone else's pain. Keanu Reeves had walked into a storm. Now he would become the thunder. The next morning, Eden's Hollow was quiet, but not for long. Keanu stood in front of the old stone building that housed the mayor's office, its faded flag fluttering in the crisp air. He wore the same coat from the day of the emergency landing, the folded letter from Lily still tucked in the inside pocket. But he hadn't come alone. Beside him stood 2 journalists, one from a major national network, the other an independent investigative reporter whose work Keanu had quietly funded for years. They hadn't arrived in black SUVs or with flashing badges, just quiet cameras, notebooks, and questions that deserved answers. The secretary behind the desk barely had time to glance up before Keanu walked in and said calmly, "Tell Mayor Dalton he has 5 minutes to speak with me, or the next time he sees me, it'll be on every television in America." There was no yelling, no posturing, just the calm certainty of a man who had seen too much and was finished pretending otherwise. 10 minutes later, the mayor, a stout, red-faced man in his 60s with thinning white hair and a reputation for avoiding conflict, shuffled into the room with a half-buttered shirt and eyes still adjusting to the light. Keanu, I wasn't expecting—" "I know you weren't," Keanu interrupted, "but I wasn't expecting to find children in this town dying because of criminal negligence either. So here we are." The mayor looked from Keanu to the reporters, his jaw tightening. "This isn't how things are done. You should have come to me privately." "I tried private. Now we do it in the open," Keanu said. He reached into his coat and placed the flash drive on the mayor's desk. "This contains audio, emails, and transaction records showing your local pharmacy is being used as a pricing front for Dorland Partners." The mayor looked at it like it was a live grenade. "I'm not here to ruin reputations," Keanu continued. "I'm here to fix a system that's broken, and I'm offering a deal." Mayor Dalton frowned. A deal? I'll fund a medical clinic. Staff, supplies, the whole operation. For free. Right here in Eden's Hollow. It'll serve every resident, no charge. But I need your full cooperation. That includes launching a local investigation, freezing Doralan's contracts, and protecting any whistleblowers. The room was silent. Keanu looked him in the eye. You owe these people that much. And if you don't act, I'll make sure everyone from the governor's office to the FBI hears about how this town chose silence over saving lives. The mayor sank into his chair, shoulders heavy. He knew this wasn't just a celebrity making a scene. This was a reckoning. The mayor sat motionless for a moment, his eyes locked on the flash drive. His fingers twitched once, then slowly reached out and pulled it toward himself like it weighed more than it should. He didn't plug it in. He didn't deny the contents. The look on his face said he already knew. I've seen pieces of this, Mayor Dalton admitted quietly. Bits of what was happening, but it was always vague, nothing this clear. And every time I got close to digging deeper, someone would remind me that Eden's Hollow can't afford lawsuits or trouble. We were told these changes were the price of modernization. Keanu shook his head. No, they were the cost of looking the other way. One of the reporters began quietly taking notes while the other flipped open a small recorder, catching every word. Keanu didn't flinch. He wasn't here to play games or issue veiled threats. He was here to shine a light. Mayor Dalton looked up. Do you know what it would take to fight this? We don't have the money. We don't have the staff. We don't even have legal counsel on retainer anymore. That's why I'm offering to help, Keanu replied. Not just with money, with a spotlight, with pressure. You don't need to win this alone, but you do need to stand up. The mayor let out a long breath, then slowly nodded. All right. We open the books. We call a town meeting. We bring in the press. One of the reporters leaned in. And you'll go on record saying that. I'll go on record saying Eden's Hollow won't stay silent anymore, the mayor said. That's a start. By that afternoon, word had spread faster than anyone expected. Keanu's presence in the mayor's office had already sparked whispers, but once the reporters began uploading footage online, it turned into something else entirely. The clip of Keanu standing with his hands folded, calmly addressing the mayor, lit up social media within hours. I'm not here as a celebrity, he had said. I'm here as someone who owes a debt, someone who remembers what it means when one person chooses to protect another. And I'm not leaving until that choice becomes policy, not luck. By sunset, the video had passed 2 million views. News vans began arriving at the edge of town. People came out of shops, homes, diners, carrying folding chairs, protest signs, or just showing up in silence. They gathered at the old community center as word spread that Keanu would speak again at dusk. But even before he took the stage, the people were already waking up. Murmurs turned to conversations, conversations to chants. Someone brought a hand-painted sign that read, Eden's Hollow is not for sale. And someone else, quietly, gently, brought Lily in her wheelchair. The revolution had begun. As the final light of day stretched across the sky, the crowd outside the community center swelled to nearly every resident of Eden's Hollow. Children sat on parents' shoulders, elderly couples leaned on canes and one another, and in the middle, lit by a string of borrowed construction lights, Keanu stepped onto a wooden platform someone had hastily built from old planks. He didn't speak from a podium. He stood at the edge of the stage with his hands in his coat pockets and a soft expression on his face, the kind people had seen in movies but rarely in real life. Here he was no longer a name on a billboard. He was just a man who remembered what it meant to owe someone everything. I didn't come here to make noise, Keanu began, voice quiet but clear. I came here to say thank you to the man who saved my life when no one else saw me. And I stayed because I saw what's happening to this town. The crowd leaned in. I know what it feels like to be invisible. I know what it means when systems that promise to serve you instead rob you in silence. But I also know what it looks like when people say, enough. I'm not here to rescue anyone. I'm here to stand beside you. He turned and pointed toward Lily in her chair. That little girl wrote a letter she never knew would reach me, but it did, and I believe letters, like voices, find their way when the world needs them most. Keanu paused, letting the stillness stretch across the lawn. Doc, you don't need permission to demand better. You don't need fame. You just need each other. And if you're willing to fight, I'll be here. I'll help build a clinic. I'll help fund legal action. I'll shine every light I can. A beat of silence, then applause, then more. People rose to their feet. Not because he was famous, because he had told the truth. And because he stayed. As Keanu stepped down from the platform, he was swarmed not by fans, but by neighbors. Sammy rolled up beside him and grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Told you once, I never forget the ones I bled for," he whispered. "Now I see you didn't forget either." That night, news outlets across the country led with the headline, "Keanu Reeves sparks small-town uprising." But in Eden's Hollow, the headline was simpler. Hope had returned. Keanu stayed at the kind of place no one would expect, a modest roadside motel off Route 27 with a flickering neon sign that read, Hollow Pines Inn. It had no security, no gated entrance, no cameras, and only 6 rooms, all single-floor units with chipped paint and worn doors. It reminded Keanu of the kind of place he used to stop at during his early acting days, when money was tight and anonymity was easy. That's exactly what he wanted tonight. After the rally, he hadn't returned to a hotel in the city or hopped aboard a rescue jet. He quietly slipped away with Elena's help and checked in under an alias, choosing the room at the far end near the vending machines. He didn't want to make a statement. He wanted to think. Inside, the room was plain. 2 lamps, thin curtains, a queen-sized bed with stiff pillows. Keanu sat by the window, the letter from Lily unfolded on his lap again. He read her words slowly, as if each line carved deeper meaning the second time around. "You gave that lady your coat in the rain. My grandpa says you don't like people knowing the good things you do, but I know anyway." He smiled, softly, then folded the letter and placed it beneath his phone. Outside, wind stirred the trees beyond the parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. All was still. For a moment, Keanu allowed himself to believe the worst might be behind them. But Elena didn't believe in coincidences. She hadn't returned to her room. After everything that happened at the mayor's office, she knew someone would retaliate. She had seen this before, quiet, rural corruption that ran deep. She changed out of her uniform and sat in an unmarked rental parked diagonally across from Keanu's room, just behind the line of hedges. From her dashboard, she could see the edge of his door. She sipped cold coffee, watching the lot. At 11:43 p.m., she saw movement. A black sedan with tinted windows rolled past the motel's driveway without stopping. 3 minutes later, it returned, this time pulling in and slowly circling the lot. The lights dimmed as it parked 3 spots from Keanu's door. Elena didn't move. She lowered herself in the seat and watched. A man stepped out, tall, lean, wearing jeans and a dark hoodie. He didn't glance around like a visitor or lost tourist. He walked straight for Keanu's door. He reached into his pocket, not for a key, but a tool. Thin, metallic. Elena moved. Without turning on headlights or drawing attention, she slipped out of the car, crossed the pavement in silence, and came up behind the man, just as he knelt to the lock. "Wrong room," she said sharply. The man spun, but Elena was faster. She pinned him against the wall with one arm across his throat, pulling his wrist behind him with the other. "Who sent you?" she asked. He said nothing. but his silence said plenty. Elena tightened her grip as the man squirmed, but she didn't flinch. Her stance was practiced, precise. She wasn't just a pilot. She had a background in tactical flight operations during her service days, and some of that training had never left her. She could spot an amateur from 100 feet, and this guy wasn't local muscle. His shoes were expensive, his grip was weak, and his hands were clean. "You've got 3 seconds before I dislocate your shoulder," Elena warned quietly. "Try me." Still no answer. From behind her, one of the motel doors creaked open. It wasn't Keanu's. Room 4. A curious guest peeked out, then slipped back inside once they saw the scene. The man finally coughed out a strained reply. "I was just told to check the room, that's all." "Who told you?" Elena pressed. "I don't know a name," he muttered. "They wired half the money up front, rest after the job." "What job?" He looked away. That's when Elena noticed something glinting just inside his coat. She reached in and pulled out a small black device, about the size of a deck of cards. A signal jammer. Next to it, a slim flash drive with a numbered tag and a corporate sticker. Archidex Solutions. She felt a chill run down her spine. Archidex was no household name, but anyone who had worked around military contractors or private intelligence knew what they were. A tech mercenary outfit known for doing the dirty work of corporations who didn't want blood on their own hands. And they were expensive. Whoever sent this guy wasn't bluffing. Blue and red lights lit up the parking lot just as she released the man to the ground. Someone had called the local police. A cruiser pulled up, 2 officers stepping out slowly with their hands near their belts. One of them looked half asleep. The other was young, too young to understand the layers of what he was walking into. Elena raised her hands and spoke quickly. "Federal contractor trying to break into my friend's room. I have evidence and video." The older officer nodded once and cuffed the man without resistance. The contractor didn't speak another word, didn't resist, just stared straight ahead as they led him into the back of the cruiser. As they drove off, Elena finally exhaled. Then she looked up toward Keanu's door. He was standing there now, barefoot, holding the letter from Lily. His eyes met hers, full of concern, but not surprise. "I heard everything," he said gently. Elena walked up the path toward him. "This isn't a warning. This is the beginning." Keanu nodded once. "Then we respond accordingly." He stepped aside and invited her in. They had work to do, because now it was personal, and Keanu had no intention of backing down. Inside the motel room, Keanu sat at the edge of the bed, while Elena placed the recovered flash drive and jammer on the small table near the window. The silence between them was heavy, but not from fear. It was the stillness before something irreversible. Keanu leaned forward, hands clasped. "Archidex Solutions doesn't take side jobs in towns like this. Not unless there's something bigger at stake." Elena nodded, pulling out her phone and snapping photos of the gear. "They're not just hired hands, they're problem solvers, for syndicates who want no fingerprints. The pharmacy company's not protecting profits, they're covering tracks." Keanu looked at the ceiling, thinking. This isn't about overcharging for meds anymore. It's about control, dependency. If they rig supply chains in places like Eden's Hollow, they can crush any whistleblower before a voice rises. "And now you've become the voice," Elena said, "and they hate that." Keanu stood up and walked to the window, peering through the curtains. The cruiser that took the contractor was gone. The lot was quiet again. Too quiet. "Tomorrow," he said firmly, "we expose everything. Not just Dorlin, not just the mayor's cover-ups. We dig all the way to the top." Elena crossed her arms. "You'll be targeted even harder. This isn't a charity mission anymore. They'll hit your reputation, your foundation, your past." Keanu turned around and looked at her with quiet resolve. "I owe Sammy. I owe Lily. I owe every kid in every town who doesn't have the luxury of being seen. And if my name's the one thing they can't buy, then that's what I'll use." Elena nodded slowly. "Then we do it right. We go federal. Press, whistleblower protection. You'll need legal, cybersecurity, surveillance backup." "I'll call in favors," Keanu replied. "Quiet ones. From people who still believe in the idea of truth." He paused and pulled the folded letter from his coat again. He ran his fingers over the creases, then held it out to Elena. "This found me for a reason. It wasn't random. And it's not going to end with a motel parking lot scuffle." She looked at the letter, then back at him. "You're not just staying in Eden's Hollow. You're making it the front line." Keanu smiled faintly. "Let's just say I've been in enough movies to know how to stage a final act." He stepped toward the nightstand, pulled out a notepad, and began writing. Names, connections, patterns. Elena turned off the main light and pulled the curtains fully shut. Outside, another car slowed near the motel. But this time, they were ready. Whatever was coming, Keanu wouldn't run. Because Eden's Hollow wasn't just a detour anymore. He had become the center of the fight. And Keanu Reeves wasn't stepping back. He was stepping in, completely. Keanu's phone rang just after dawn. He had barely slept. The weight of the previous night still sat heavy in his bones. Elena was already up, combing through encrypted files they'd recovered from the contractor's devices. The moment he saw the caller ID, St. Agnes Children's Hospital, his stomach turned. The nurse on the line didn't waste time with formalities. "Lily's vitals are dropping. She's developed an allergic reaction to the new generic meds. Her body is rejecting them. We're moving her to the ICU now." Keanu didn't say goodbye. He grabbed his jacket, called out to Elena, and was out the door in less than a minute. The streets of Eden's Hollow were still waking up. But for Keanu, the day had already collapsed into a tunnel with only one destination. He burst through the hospital's emergency entrance. The front desk nurse didn't stop him. They all knew who he was by now. He raced down the hall, turned the corner, and found Sammy pacing outside Lily's room with his oxygen tank and trembling hands. "She went cold," Sammy whispered, his voice cracking. "Her little hands. They went cold. I tried. I didn't know what to do." Keanu gently placed both hands on Sammy's shoulders. "We're going to fix this." Inside the room, machines beeped rhythmically, but each one felt like a countdown. Lily lay still, her tiny frame lost beneath wires and monitors. Her skin was pale, her breathing labored. A team of nurses worked around her, adjusting drips, whispering updates. Keanu pulled a chair close and sat beside her. He took her hand, small and fragile, wrapped in tape, and held it gently. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered. "Not this time." For a long moment, he just sat there in silence. Then, like a fire being relit, he stood up, walked into the hallway, and began making calls. First his personal physician, then a contact from a pharmaceutical nonprofit he had supported years ago. Then his legal team, then an investigative journalist embedded in healthcare corruption stories. He paced as he spoke, voice steady but urgent. "Her name is Lily Langston. She's been denied access to her original medication due to a local distribution lock. I need to know who's holding the supply, and I need a direct contact. Now." Elena arrived at the hospital 10 minutes later with a printout of every pharmaceutical shipment delay linked to Dorland's shell company. It confirmed what Keanu feared. Lily's drug had been rerouted days ago, redirected to a warehouse in another state. "I'm calling her bluff," Keanu said, eyes set. "They want to hold her hostage? Fine. Let's break the door down." He stepped into the hospital's family room and dialed a name he hadn't used in years, Mira Tallis, CEO of Helix Biomed. She owed him a favor. Years ago, he had helped her secure funding for a documentary on rare diseases. Now it was time to collect. The call connected. "Mira, it's Keanu. I need your help. It's urgent. A child's life is on the line." Mira didn't hesitate. "Send me her medical file. I'll wake up the R&D team. We've got surplus inventory of that formula. I'll find a way." Keanu texted over the documents. Mira called back minutes later. "We have it. We'll reroute the shipment through our private distribution arm. I'm sending a corporate jet now to the nearest regional airfield." "How soon?" Keanu asked. 12 hours, minimum. Maybe less. I'll personally make sure it clears every checkpoint." It wasn't fast enough, but it was something. Keanu returned to Lily's bedside. Sammy hadn't moved. The old man sat slouched in a corner, face buried in his hands. Keanu knelt beside him. "They're sending it," he said. "She's going to get the real medication." Sammy lifted his head, eyes wet with exhaustion and helplessness. 12 hours? I know. The ICU staff had done all they could, but Lily's heart rate had slowed, her breathing now entirely supported by machines. Her small chest rose and fell like it was being pulled by invisible strings. Keanu whispered to her softly, recounting a story from one of his childhood films about a girl who beat impossible odds to survive. "You're stronger than any of them, Lily," he said. "You've already done the impossible. Just hold on a little longer." Throughout the day, Keanu juggled calls and coordinated with Elena and Mira's logistics team. Sammy called every distant relative for prayer chains. The hospital allowed Lily's favorite nurse to play her favorite lullaby on repeat, an old violin track that echoed through the ward like a hymn. Outside, the media buzzed. News vans camped outside the hospital. But Keanu stayed hidden from the cameras, refusing to speak until Lily was safe. At hour 8, a blizzard formed in the skies over Tennessee, threatening to delay the incoming jet. Mira called personally. "We may need to land 3 towns over. It'll take a few hours, by ambulance, to get it to you." Keanu's voice didn't rise. "Then you land 3 towns over, and I'll be waiting on the runway." He hung up, turned to Elena. "Let's go." She nodded. They jumped into a hospital van, sirens ready, cleared by local authorities, who now saw Keanu as more than a visitor. He was their anchor. The drive, through sleet and ice, was harrowing. Branches snapped under snow, winds howled, but Keanu sat in silence, focused, hands gripping his seat. "You okay?" Elena asked. "I'm thinking about a letter," he said. "A little girl's letter that was never supposed to reach me. And how somehow it did. That can't be chance." Back at the hospital, Sammy stayed beside Lily. He whispered old lullabies from his youth, voice trembling but never breaking. "She's a fighter," he said to the nurse. "She's got that in her blood." The private jet touched down just after midnight, landing on a frozen tarmac at the regional airfield. Keanu and Elena were already there, waiting with the transport crew. The snow had let up just long enough to permit a safe landing. A medical-grade cooler was rolled off the plane and transferred to a waiting ambulance, sirens already wailing. Keanu climbed in with the container on his lap, refusing to let it out of his sight. They sped back to Eden's Hollow, every minute on the road a weight on his chest. He checked his watch constantly, calculating. At the hospital, the ICU staff had prepped everything in advance. They were ready the moment Keanu stepped inside. The lead nurse took the cooler and immediately began preparing the dosage. Sammy stood as Keanu entered, eyes swollen. "She's still here," he whispered. "Barely." But she waited. Then 15 minutes, Lily received the first vial of the original medication. The effect wouldn't be immediate, but it was her only shot. Keanu sat again beside her, his hand resting gently over hers. Hours passed. The machines beeped, sometimes erratically. A few dips, a few climbs. Then, a slow, steady rise in oxygen. The nurse blinked at the monitor. "We've got movement, her vitals are stabilizing." Sammy let out a breath that turned into a sob. Keanu's shoulders fell in silent relief. By dawn, Lily's skin had regained color. Her breathing improved. The machines began doing less. Her fingers twitched. The hospital staff stood quietly outside her room, watching through the glass. Keanu leaned closer to her ear. "You held on, just like I knew you would." That morning, the hospital lobby overflowed with people bringing flowers, toys, and thank you cards. No one announced Keanu's involvement, but word had already spread. He stepped outside for a moment, needing air. Snow was still falling, light and slow. Across the street, a little girl held up a hand-drawn sign. It was Lily's sketch, the one of Keanu giving his jacket to a homeless woman. The girl waved. Keanu smiled and waved back. He didn't need applause. He needed her to live. And now, she just might. The hospital lobby was quiet when the reporter approached. Her name was Dana Holt, a journalist known for her empathy as much as her precision. She didn't come charging with cameras or questions. She came with an old photo, folded at the edges, from a small-town newspaper no longer in print. A teenage boy with shaggy hair, no name listed, just a vague caption. Local youth volunteers at food drive. She handed it gently to Elena, who was seated alone near the coffee machine. Elena stared at the photo, then back at Dana. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Public Records Archive, from a now-defunct local press. It matches a report from the same year Keanu went missing from home, just for a few weeks, back in the early 80s. The timelines match. The height, the scar on his left eyebrow. It was him, was it?" Elena didn't answer. She didn't have to. That afternoon, Dana published a piece. It wasn't salacious or scandalous. It was heartfelt, carefully worded, titled simply, "The Summer the World Forgot Keanu Reeves." But Eden's Hollow didn't. It told the story of a 17-year-old boy who had run away after a traumatic family incident. A boy who spent 2 months in a town called Eden's Hollow, surviving off diner scraps, sleeping behind churches, hiding from the world under the name Kyle. A boy who met a school janitor named Sammy Langston, who saw through the disguise, offered food, then safety, then something more: dignity. Keanu never spoke publicly about that time. Not because he was ashamed, but because it was sacred. A chapter of his life that shaped who he became, but never asked for recognition. Now it was out. The media pounced. Headlines flooded in. Keanu's secret life in small-town America. The town that sheltered a future star. From runaway to revolutionary, the forgotten chapter of Keanu Reeves. The hospital was swarmed with calls. The mayor's office, too. Elena turned off her phone for the first time in years. Sammy, for his part, simply sat at Lily's bedside and smiled. Keanu didn't dodge the headlines. That evening, he stood in front of the same community center where he had spoken just days before, and he addressed the town again. This time, not as a crusader, but as a boy who had once hidden behind dumpsters just to survive. "I didn't want the world to know because I thought they wouldn't understand," he said, voice soft, eyes glassy. "But if we're ashamed of our beginnings, we'll never value the journey." People stood silently, hands over hearts. Some cried, others nodded. No one spoke until he was done. "I was just a scared kid. I had nothing. And this town gave me kindness without asking for anything back. That kindness shaped me. And that man?" He pointed to the hospital window, where Sammy sat visible from outside. "That man is the reason I'm standing here today. So now, it's my turn to give back." The silence turned to applause. And somewhere nearby, Lily stirred in her sleep. By the next morning, the national conversation had shifted. What had begun as a local investigation into medical corruption was now something deeper. A story of redemption, gratitude, and the hidden corners of a celebrity's life that no one ever knew existed. Major news outlets invited Keanu for interviews. Talk shows wanted exclusives. Publishers floated offers for a memoir. But Keanu declined them all. Instead, he stayed in Eden's Hollow. He spent the morning walking the old streets he once paced as a teenager. Every cracked sidewalk, every rusting street sign felt like a chapter long buried. The town hadn't changed much. That same faded diner still had the chipped green booths. The church still rang its bell at noon, and tucked behind a row of modest houses, he found the tiny patch of grass where he and Sammy used to sit in the evenings, back when the world felt too heavy for a 17-year-old to carry alone. He sat there again now, Sammy beside him, older, frailer, but still radiating that quiet strength. "You never told anyone," Keanu said. Sammy shook his head. "Weren't my memories to sell?" Keanu swallowed hard. "Why'd you help me back then? You didn't know who I was." Sammy gave a crooked smile. "Didn't matter. I knew you were somebody's son, somebody's boy, and you looked like you hadn't heard a kind word in weeks." Keanu nodded. He remembered that feeling too well, the silence of being unseen, the ache of wanting to matter to someone. "You gave me more than shelter," Keanu said. "You gave me dignity. I didn't even know how much I needed that until years later." Sammy chuckled. "You were stubborn, tried to pay me back by sweeping the halls after school, told me you'd someday make a movie where the janitor saves the world." Keanu smiled, his eyes damp. "Guess I still owe you that." Later that afternoon, Keanu returned to the hospital where Lily rested. He sat by her side, stroking her hand gently, her fingers pale but warm. Machines beeped softly. The new shipment of medicine was on its way, but time moved slowly when a child's life hung in the balance. He leaned close and whispered, "You know, your grandpa once saved a kid who didn't think he was worth saving. That kid was me. And now, I get to be here with you. That's the best kind of circle, don't you think?" Lily stirred slightly in her sleep, a faint smile curling at the corner of her mouth. Back outside, the townspeople had formed a loose vigil. Candles lined the sidewalk near the hospital entrance. Handmade signs read, "Fight for Lily" and "Thank you, Sammy." Some residents left notes at the door. Others simply stood in silence. The story had stopped being just about Keanu. It had become about all of them. About standing up when the world tells you to sit down. About remembering the small acts of courage that ripple out decades later. And as the sun set again over Eden's Hollow, Keanu realized something else. This wasn't a return. It was a beginning. The hospital hallway was silent except for the gentle hiss of the oxygen machine beside Lily's bed. Keanu sat beside her, eyes locked on the slow rise and fall of her chest. The delivery of the original medication had come less than an hour before her vitals started to crash. Doctors had rushed to administer the treatment, but it was unclear whether it would work in time. Now, as the night deepened, a faint pink returned to her cheeks. Keanu didn't speak. He simply stayed, hand gently resting on Lily's blanket, as monitors began to beep at steadier intervals. Sammy sat nearby, quiet and trembling. A nurse entered to check her vitals and whispered, "She's stabilizing. It's working." Those words hit harder than any applause Keanu had ever received. His shoulders dropped. For the first time in hours, he exhaled fully. Outside the hospital, things were shifting too. The video of Keanu's speech, along with the documentation he'd submitted, had triggered something larger. Federal investigators had quietly arrived in Eden's Hollow earlier that day. The Department of Health and Human Services had been flooded with calls, emails, and media pressure demanding action against Doralon Partners and its shell distributors. By morning, a string of federal subpoenas had been issued. Arrests began within hours. Local pharmacy officials were taken in first. Individuals who had signed off on inflated invoices, fraudulent drug trials, and kickbacks disguised as rural outreach stipends. The local police department, which had been reluctant to act, now had no choice. The pressure was too loud, the truth too glaring. One name kept surfacing: Richard Hanley, the regional director overseeing procurement for Doralon's southern territories. He had vanished the moment news broke. A warrant was issued for his arrest, and federal marshals were dispatched. Elena watched it all unfold from a hospital TV. Her arms were crossed, her face unreadable. When Keanu entered the room, she didn't speak at first. She just looked at him. long and steady. "You made them flinch," she said finally. "You didn't just poke the bear, you dragged it into daylight." Keanu shook his head. "I didn't do it alone." "No," she agreed, "but none of this would have happened if you walked away." That afternoon, the hospital staff organized a small town hall in the chapel downstairs. Word spread quickly. People poured in, nurses, residents, reporters, even the mayor. They weren't there for a speech. They were there to bear witness. Keanu stood at the front, beside Sammy, who gripped his cane tightly. He didn't read from notes, he just spoke. "I was 15 the first time I stepped foot in Eden's Hollow. I didn't have a home. I didn't have a name anyone would recognize, and I didn't have hope. But one man, one janitor, saw me. He gave me food. He gave me silence when I needed it. And eventually, he gave me courage." The room was still, every breath held. "I never forgot him," Keanu continued, "and I never forgot this town." The moment Keanu stepped down from the podium, the silence hung heavy in the hospital chapel. Then came the applause. Slow, reverent, and rising into something that felt like the release of decades of pain. Sammy wiped his eyes. Elena gave Keanu the smallest nod from the back of the room. But the story wasn't over. News outlets had stationed themselves just outside the town line. Interviews with townspeople aired on national networks. Hashtags flooded the internet. Eden's Hollow was no longer just a dot on a forgotten map. It had become a symbol of what happens when silence is broken by courage. The pressure on Dorilan's parent company intensified. Financial regulators began digging into their tax filings. Former employees started coming forward. A whistleblower hotline Keanu helped fund saw more than 300 tips in 48 hours. What had started as a single girl's medical crisis was now triggering a full-scale industry audit. Attorneys general from multiple states called for immediate hearings. The heat was spreading, and quickly. Then came the announcement. The Department of Justice issued a statement confirming that multiple executives were under criminal investigation. Richard Hanley, the regional director who'd fled, was found attempting to cross the border into Mexico. He was taken into custody without incident. His laptop, seized at the scene, held detailed correspondence. Emails about pricing structures, town vulnerabilities, and specific children's names. Lily's name was on that list, marked with a red star and labeled non-primity. When Keanu was told, he didn't get angry. He just closed his eyes for a long time. Then he walked out of the hospital and stood under the open sky, letting the air hit him like absolution. No words were spoken, none were needed. The next day, Lily was moved out of ICU. She was awake, groggy, but smiling. When Keanu entered the room, she whispered, "Did you get them?" And he nodded, tears in his eyes. "I told you I wouldn't leave," he said. He sat by her bedside for hours, reading from a worn-out children's book she kept beside her pillow. Sammy watched quietly, eyes brimming. It wasn't just a victory, it was justice, personal and deep. In town, the newly authorized clinic plans were underway. Keanu had already funded the first 6 months through a private donation routed through a foundation in Sammy's name. A team of pro bono lawyers had flown in from New York to help residents navigate medical claims and insurance disputes caused by the price gouging scheme. One of the lawyers told a local reporter, "This isn't just a case, it's a movement." At a small press gathering outside the town hall, Keanu spoke once more. Not to shame the guilty, but to honor the quiet heroes. "I didn't come back here to expose anyone. I came because someone I owed needed help. But in helping him, I found hundreds of others. This isn't my story, it's theirs." He turned to Sammy, who stood beside him, gripping his walker. This man didn't just clean floors. He cleaned up after a world that didn't want to see boys like me. And now it's time we clean up after the damage others tried to hide. That line made headlines across the country. And back in Lily's hospital room, With the sun pouring through the window and her grandfather at her side, the little girl who started it all picked up a crayon and began to draw a picture of Keanu. Not as an actor, but as a man holding open a door for 100 others behind him. Hope had not only returned to Eden's Hollow, it was rebuilding it, brick by quiet brick. Keanu walked through the quiet streets of Eden's Hollow just after sunrise. The air smelled of dew and wildflowers, and for once, no cameras followed. He had asked for privacy this time. No press, no staged ribbon cuttings. Just one man fulfilling a promise. The next stop was a modest single-story home nestled beneath 2 towering oak trees. The porch sagged slightly, the mailbox leaned, but the bones were good. More importantly, it sat just 6 blocks from the hospital. Keanu had bought it in full under a local alias, then quietly transferred the deed into Sammy's name. No headlines, no signature fanfare, just one act of gratitude, finally made whole. Inside, he had furnished it simply but warmly. A bright yellow bedroom for Lily, filled with books, sketch pads, and a telescope aimed at the stars. A recliner for Sammy, placed near a sunny window with a view of the garden. The kitchen was stocked, the fridge full. On the counter sat a note. "Welcome home. You've always deserved one." That afternoon, Keanu drove Sammy and Lily to the house. Sammy's hands trembled as he wheeled himself up the front ramp. Lily gasped when she saw her name hand-painted on the mailbox. Keanu said nothing. He just opened the front door and let them walk into the warmth that had waited so long. Sammy stood silently in the doorway, his eyes scanning every corner. Lily darted toward her room with delight. But Sammy didn't move. He just looked at Keanu and asked softly, "What?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "Because when I was nobody, you gave me something. Not money, not shelter, though you gave those too. You gave me dignity. You made me feel seen. Now, I want Lily to grow up, never doubting she matters." Sammy's mouth opened, then closed. He reached out, gripping Keanu's arm. "You didn't just repay the favor," he said hoarsely. "You made sure it never has to happen again." That night, while Lily played with crayons in her new room, Keanu and Sammy sat on the back porch, watching the sky fade from gold to violet. There were no bodyguards, no scripts, just silence, and the rhythm of 2 men connected by more than history. By grace. But Keanu wasn't finished. The following week, construction trucks rolled into the lot across from the high school. The old community center, long shuttered and nearly forgotten, stood with boarded windows and vines creeping through the siding. Most folks in town had assumed it was beyond saving. They were wrong. Keanu had purchased the property through a charitable trust. He had already hired local contractors, paid above market rates, and told them to use whatever materials would make it last. The plans included a small health clinic, a counseling wing, a tutoring room, and an art space for kids. Every detail was designed with one family in mind, but meant to serve many. And above the door, in clean carved wood, would hang a name that no one in Eden's Hollow would forget. The Lily House. The sign arrived on a Thursday morning. Keanu installed it himself. As he stood back and looked at it, a gentle breeze lifted the edges of his jacket. A few passers-by stopped and watched in silence. One woman whispered to her son, "That's the man who changed everything." But Keanu didn't hear them. He was already thinking about the next town, the next Lily, the next Sammy who might be out there, sweeping unnoticed floors while carrying the whole world on his back. And how, this time, someone would notice. The reopening of the community center wasn't marked by a grand ceremony or celebrity spotlight. Instead, it began with the quiet hum of conversation and the distant laughter of children echoing through the halls. A week after renovations were complete, Keanu returned not with a press entourage, but with Sammy and Lily beside him, both staring up at the wooden sign as if it were the final piece in a puzzle they didn't know was missing. Lily clutched Keanu's hand as they stepped inside. The front lobby had been transformed. Bright walls, open spaces, welcoming light streaming through newly installed skylights. Volunteers were already setting up bookshelves, stacking medical supplies, arranging art tables, and preparing the free clinic room for its first round of checkups. Keanu had made one request of the Lily House: should feel small. He kept the promises he made. The tutoring center had a dedicated reading room named after Sammy. The mural in the main hallway was based on one of Lily's sketches, enlarged and brought to life by a local artist Keanu had quietly supported through a grant. A side wing had a counseling room with a single plaque above its door. "You're safe here." Sammy stood at the mural for a long time, eyes glistening. "I used to think the best thing I ever did was stop that fight behind the auditorium," he murmured. "But this tells me I didn't just stop something. I started something." Keanu nodded. "You saved a life." And that life came back to build more. When word spread that Keanu was personally funding similar projects across rural towns, quiet investments in healthcare access, mental health, education, it shocked the public. He didn't hold press conferences. Instead, nonprofit heads and small-town mayors quietly confirmed the truth. Anonymous donations had started pouring in after the Eden's Hollow uprising, and the name attached to the account's KRH initiative, Keanu Reeves for Humanity. Reporters tried to press him for interviews. Talk shows begged for exclusives, but Keanu declined all of it. "This isn't about my story," he said simply. "It's about the kids who need better ones." One afternoon, Lily returned to the clinic for a follow-up visit. Her color had returned. Her laughter was stronger. She was holding a notebook close to her chest. Inside were dozens of drawings. Keanu as a knight, her grandpa as a wise wizard, and herself as a girl with wings. Keanu knelt down and asked, "What's that one?" Lily smiled. "That's me flying over our house." Sammy chuckled behind her. "She's already dreaming bigger." Keanu smiled back. "That's the goal." Before leaving the center that evening, Keanu stood alone in the hallway of the newly built Lily House. Sunlight poured through the windows, hitting the wall where Lily's mural stretched from floor to ceiling. He took a slow breath, the kind you only take when something broken finally feels whole again. He had come to Eden's Hollow by accident, but he was leaving something behind on purpose. Proof that legacy doesn't come from fame or fortune. It comes from gratitude, from remembering, from paying it forward so thoroughly that the next person never has to fall as far. As he walked out the front doors, the carved sign above him swayed gently in the wind. The Lily House was open, and hope had found a permanent address. The letter arrived late in the afternoon, long after the construction crew had packed up for the day at the Lily House. Keanu returned to his small lakeside cabin outside Eden's Hollow, the one he'd rented quietly during the ordeal. It was the first place he'd felt peace in weeks, the kind of calm that settles deep in the bones. Not silence, but stillness. A light breeze skimmed across the lake, and birds dipped low across the rippling surface. On the kitchen counter was a small envelope with a yellow heart sticker on the back. His name was written in purple crayon. Just Keanu. No return address, no stamps. Someone must have hand-delivered it to avoid the media. He opened it slowly. Inside was a piece of lined notebook paper, slightly wrinkled, folded carefully in quarters. A few crayon drawings decorated the top. The biggest one showed 4 stick figures, one flying a plane with a ponytail, another standing beside a dog, one holding a broom with a wide smile, and the fourth, a tiny girl with a heart floating above her hand. Underneath it was a short letter written in large, shaky handwriting. "Dear Keanu, Grandpa says I can come home soon. The doctor said my heart is strong again. I don't really know what you did, but he says you helped make it happen." I drew us. That's Miss Elena flying. You with your dog. I hope you get a dog. Grandpa with his broom. And me. Thank you for keeping your promise, even if I didn't know I made one. Lily. Keanu stood with the letter in his hand for a long time. He didn't sit down. He didn't speak. The edges of the paper flapped lightly in the breeze coming in through the screen door. Eventually, he walked down the path to the lake and sat at the old wooden bench he'd been using for morning coffee. The sun was low now, turning the lake into molten gold. He read the letter again, and then again. There were moments in life when time slows not because of tragedy, but because of something quiet and right. A course corrected, a ripple of grace. That letter felt like one. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps on the gravel path. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. Elena sat beside him, saying nothing. She simply looked out at the lake, her pilot's jacket folded neatly on her lap, her hair pulled back in a tired braid. The silence wasn't awkward. It was earned. Keanu passed her the letter. She read it, eyes scanning the drawing first. Her lips curled into a small smile. Then she handed it back without comment. They sat there until the sky turned indigo. No photos, no plans, no talking about what came next. Just the wind, the scent of pine, the soft lap of water against the dock, and the quiet company of two people who had survived something together. A small girl had reminded them of everything that mattered, and the promise that had once been unspoken was now fulfilled. Later that night, the wind picked up gently, rustling the trees outside the cabin and carrying with it a quiet kind of music, the sound of a town healing. Far off in the distance, lights blinked on across Eden's Hollow, porch lamps, street lights, the newly restored sign outside the community center, now lit for the first time in years. All of it felt alive again. Keanu sat by the small fireplace inside, the letter still in his hands. He had read it so many times the folds were beginning to wear thin. He knew every word by heart now, but it wasn't the words that stayed with him. It was the drawing. 4 stick figures. 4 lives connected by something no algorithm could predict, no script could write. Lily, without knowing it, had given them all a new center. Elena, the steady protector, Sammy, the soul of the town, Keanu, the once-loved boy, and Lily, the spark. Her letter hadn't just thanked him. It had released something inside of him. A permission. A quiet absolution for a promise long buried under fame, grief, and distance. He reached for a frame and slipped the letter inside. He didn't hang it on a wall. He placed it on the mantel, next to a small photo he'd taken of Lily in her hospital bed the morning she woke up laughing. It wasn't staged. No one had noticed him take it. She had been mid-laugh, eyes squinted, mouth wide, holding up a drawing of Sammy in a superhero cape. It was ridiculous and perfect. Outside, a soft knock tapped at the door. Not hurried, just enough. He opened it to find Sammy standing there with a thermos in one hand and a tired smile stretched across his lined face. "I figured you'd be awake," Sammy said. "Thought you might want some tea." Keanu stepped aside and waved him in. "Only if it's the kind you used to sneak into the janitor's closet back in the day," Sammy chuckled. "Same one. Some habits don't die." They sat by the fire, steam rising from mismatched mugs. Sammy looked around the cabin and nodded. "Feels like you," he said. "Quiet. Solid. Doesn't need to prove anything." Keanu stared at the letter on the mantel. "Jimmy gave me back something I didn't know I lost," he murmured. "Or maybe I did know, I just stopped looking for it." Sammy didn't respond right away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded handkerchief. Inside was a small, wrinkled photograph. It showed a much younger Keanu, barely a teenager, sitting on the back steps of Eden's Hollow High, a sandwich in his hand and a stray dog curled up beside him. Sammy was in the background, sweeping, watching over him. "I kept this all these years," Sammy said, because you were the first kid who ever thanked me like I mattered. You saved me." "I didn't just save you," Sammy said, his voice low. "You gave me a reason to stay." They sat in silence for a while. The fire popped once. Outside, the wind blew across the lake in slow, rhythmic pulses. As the hour grew late, Sammy stood to leave. "You'll be here a while?" Keanu nodded. "I think I will." "Good," Sammy said. "This place needs people who remember." When the door closed behind him, Keanu stepped back out to the porch, wrapped in a blanket. He looked up at the stars, scattered and brilliant above the still water. And in his heart he could feel it, that something had shifted for good. He was no longer just passing through. 3 months later, the cabin of the plane hummed with a low, steady rhythm as it climbed through layers of soft clouds. The seats were filled with quiet passengers, each tucked into their own little world. But in row 2A, a girl with short dark hair, freckles across her cheeks, and a heart-shaped pendant resting just below her collarbone sat upright. Her face lit with awe as she peered through the window. Lily was flying again. But this time, it wasn't for hospitals or desperate hope. This time, she was going to speak. The event was a national gathering hosted by a children's foundation, one that highlighted stories of resilience and voices often unheard, and Lily had been chosen to speak, not because of her illness, but because of her courage. She was the youngest speaker on the list, and the only one whose story had united an entire town. Across the aisle, Keanu sat quietly, reading over her speech one last time. He wasn't correcting anything, just listening with his eyes, absorbing the heart of it. He still remembered the moment he had watched her open her eyes in that hospital room weeks ago. Her first words had been, "Did Sammy fix the coffee machine?" And then, "Did I miss anything important?" Keanu had smiled through tears then. He was smiling now, too. Elena's voice came over the cabin's speakers, warm, calm, and unmistakable. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently cruising at 30,000 feet. If you look out the left side of the aircraft, you'll catch a glimpse of Eden's Hollow. Temperature on the ground is 68 degrees and skies are clear." Lily pressed her face closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass for a moment. The town was small below, nestled between fields and trees, the lake like a coin shining under the sun. She turned and looked at Keanu. "That's where I got my mom, my grandpa, and my life back." He looked out the window with her. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. The pendant around her neck caught the sunlight as the plane tilted slightly, revealing the faint engraved initials etched into the back. LR, and a tiny set of wings. It was made from scrap aluminum, pulled from the fuselage of the emergency plane that brought them all together. Keanu had asked a local metal artist to shape it quietly. No press, no cameras. Just a quiet symbol of something that survived. When he gave it to Lily, she hadn't said a word. She'd just hugged him and whispered, "Now I always carry the sky with me." Now, at 30,000 feet, she was doing just that. Keanu leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to breathe, to remember what this moment meant. The girl beside him wasn't just a survivor. She was a story that had refused to be silenced, and she would walk onto that stage soon, wearing a pendant forged from chaos, and tell the world about the people who refused to give up on her. The plane descended gently as the city skyline came into view, but inside the cabin, time felt slower. Lily rested her head against the window, the curve of her smile unchanging, her eyes dreamy but wide open. She had a notebook on her lap, pages filled with doodles, some playful, some profound. A sketch of Sammy pushing a broom, Elena in a pilot's cap, Keanu with a guitar, drawn with extra care. She turned toward Keanu again. "Do you think people will listen to me?" Keanu tilted his head. "They already are." Lily bit her lip. "Even though I'm small?" "Especially because you're small," he answered. "Big voices come in all sizes, but the ones that change the world usually come from the ones no one expects. She sat a little straighter, her fingers brushing the edge of the pendant. Her hands were steadier now, her coloring better. There had been fear before, dark hours where Sammy had cried silently at her bedside. But now she was here, alive, and she wasn't just getting through it. She was leading something. Across the aisle, a woman leaned over and whispered, "Is that her? The girl from Eden's Hollow?" Lily smiled shyly. Keanu gave a gentle nod. "You're brave," the woman said, placing her hand over her heart. "My niece has the same condition. You're giving her hope." Lily looked stunned for a moment. Then she nodded, voice soft. "That's why I'm going." As they touched down, Elena's voice came through the speakers again, this time with something she hadn't rehearsed. "To our very special passengers on board today. Some journeys begin in the clouds, but the most important ones start in the heart. Welcome home, Lily." The cabin applauded. Not politely, not as strangers clapping out of habit. It was spontaneous, warm, human. Keanu glanced at Lily. She was trying not to cry. He didn't stop her. The jet rolled to a stop, and as they waited to disembark, Keanu pulled a small envelope from his coat pocket. "Before we go, this is for you." Lily opened it carefully. Inside was a letter on thick cream paper, typed words but signed by hand. It was from the Foundation's director. Lily Ramirez, it read. "We are honored to inform you that your name will be added to the Foundation's list of Youth Courage Ambassadors. You represent what it means to fight, to speak, and to believe." Her hand shook as she held the letter. "I'm an ambassador?" "You are now," Keanu said, "and you earned every syllable." As they stepped off the plane, cameras flashed in the distance, but Keanu motioned for them to stay back. This moment was hers. She walked beside him, not behind him, as reporters whispered and scribbled notes. But no one called out his name. They were looking at her. Later that evening, after the event, she stood on stage in front of hundreds of guests, with Keanu and Elena in the front row, and Sammy watching via live stream back in Eden's Hollow. Her voice was soft at first. Then it grew. She talked about her mom, who she never knew, about her grandpa, who fought for her, and about a letter she once wrote, not knowing if anyone would ever read it. Then she said something that made the entire room fall silent. "A lot of people think heroes wear capes or have powers," she said. "But mine wore a janitor's shirt and carried me when I couldn't walk. Mine flew a plane through a storm. And one of them sat with me when I was scared and didn't say anything at all, just stayed." In that moment, Keanu felt something close in his throat. The circle was complete. Not because he had saved her, but because she was saving others now. And that was everything. Snow fell like whispers on the quiet streets of Eden's Hollow. The town, once weighed down by secrets and silence, now glowed softly in the early light of winter. Keanu walked alone, bundled in the same old coat, its fabric worn but warm, carrying the memories of the journey that had brought him here. His boots left careful prints along the snow-dusted sidewalk as he passed familiar buildings that now bore unfamiliar joy. Children's laughter echoed from the refurbished community center now known as the Lily House. Warm lights shimmered through the frosted windows. On the corner across from the park, a new bakery had opened. Elderly neighbors leaned on each other as they admired a snowman with mismatched buttons and a crooked grin. Keanu paused outside the Langston Memorial Clinic. A fresh wooden sign stood beside the door, carved with elegant care, built on the promise of one life saving another. He let his eyes linger on it, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. The day Sammy pulled him from the streets. The day Lily's letter reached his hands. The day everything changed. Through the glass, he spotted Lily inside. Her cheeks were rosy, and a knitted hat covered her once bald head, now sprouting soft hair. She was carefully placing scarves into a donation basket beside the clinic's welcome desk, laughing with another young volunteer. Every few seconds, she looked over her shoulder, making sure each scarf was folded just right. Keanu smiled. She had always paid attention to the little things. The door creaked open gently as Keanu stepped inside. But Lily didn't notice him at first. She was focused, her tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth as she tied a bow around one of the scarves. A small sign above the basket read, "Warmed by Lily, with love." He didn't interrupt her. Instead, he stood quietly for a while, taking in the scene. Nurses walked by with mugs of cocoa. Patients chatted near a Christmas tree donated by a local scout troop. This place had become more than a clinic. It was a promise fulfilled. A new kind of heartbeat for a town that had once struggled to breathe. When Lily finally turned and saw him, her whole face lit up. She waved furiously, nearly knocking over a stack of gloves. Keanu waved back, one hand in his coat pocket, the other raised in a slow, steady gesture of peace. Then he turned and stepped back outside into the cold. He wasn't done yet. Not quite. He made his way down a path cleared of snow, leading to the edge of town, where the old airstrip once sat forgotten and overgrown. Now it had been cleared, leveled, and repurposed. A new sign marked its entrance, Keanu Field. Keanu stood at the edge of Keanu Field, gazing across the wide, empty stretch of snow-blanketed asphalt. The wind tugged softly at his coat, carrying the sounds of distant laughter from town, the echo of new life breathed into an old place. A few small hangars stood nearby, freshly painted, their doors marked with emergency symbols and flight numbers. One hangar bore a mural of a young girl holding a paper heart, her arms outstretched toward a plane in the sky. The breeze picked up, stirring flurries around his boots. He stepped forward, slowly, letting the silence sink in. Here, months ago, a landing that wasn't supposed to happen had changed everything. It had exposed a system. It had reopened old wounds. And it had reopened his heart. Keanu took a deep breath, looking skyward, then down at the footprints trailing behind him in the snow. With one gloved hand, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn envelope, the final drawing Lily had given him, folded neatly. He opened it, the paper trembling slightly in the cold. The sketch still moved him. A pilot, a janitor, a man with a dog, and a small girl holding a heart. On the back, her message, "Thank you for keeping your promise, even if I didn't know I made one." Keanu whispered softly into the wind, "You saved me first, Sammy. I just finished the journey." He folded the paper again and pressed it against his chest, then turned toward the horizon. There was still more to do. More towns, more voices, more forgotten stories waiting to be heard. But in that moment, he let himself be still. Not as an actor, not as a symbol, just as a man who had once been broken and who had been put back together. One life, one choice, one promise at a time. As snow swirled around him, the town behind him shimmered like a second chance. And somewhere high above, a jet carved a path through the sky, leaving behind nothing but silence and the knowledge that someone had kept their word. Have you ever made a promise that changed your life? Tell us in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story. What kind of story would you like to see next about Keanu Reeves helping someone in need? Drop your ideas and let's build the next incredible journey together.